The city of Enugu was alive that afternoon. Yellow buses honked, traders shouted over one another, hawkers weaved between cars balancing trays of bananas and roasted groundnuts on their heads. The air was thick with dust and the smell of fried akra. But in all that noise, 3 small children sat on the edge of a cracked gutter, invisible to everyone. They were triplets, Daniel, David, and Deborah. Their clothes were worn thin, patched so many times the fabric barely held together. Their ribs showed through their shirts, their bare feet blackened from years of walking on hot tar. Nobody looked at them. To the world, they were just another set of street kids, like the hundreds scattered around the city. Daniel, the eldest by minutes, was staring at a piece of bread they had begged for since morning. He split it into 3, carefully handing a piece each to his brother and sister. None of them complained, though the bread was stale. David chewed slowly, pretending to enjoy it. Deborah, the only girl, smiled weakly, her small hands covering her growling stomach. Suddenly, a scream tore through the city's noise. "Help! Somebody help!" The voice came from the canal, a wide, dirty stretch of water that cut through the heart of Enugu like a wound. People turned to look, but didn't move. Some shook their heads, muttering, "Nawa, person don enter water again," before going back to their business. The triplets sprang up. They dashed toward the canal, their small legs kicking up dust as they ran. On the far side, a little girl about their age thrashed in the water, her white dress ballooning around her. Her tiny hands slapped the surface desperately. The current dragged her under. Deborah gasped. "She's drowning." Daniel didn't think twice. He threw off his shirt and jumped into the filthy water. David followed immediately, coughing as the smell of sewage filled his nose. Deborah ran along the bank, shouting, hold her tight." The 2 brothers struggled against the current, their arms flailing. Daniel reached the girl first, grabbing her by the arm as she slipped under again. Her eyes rolled back, bubbles escaping her mouth. He pulled her up with all his strength. "David, help me," he cried. Together, the boys dragged her toward the bank, coughing and choking as the dirty water filled their mouths. Deborah reached out, catching her brother's hand and pulling with all the strength her skinny frame could gather. Finally, with one last heave, they rolled the unconscious girl onto the grass. Her lips were pale. She wasn't breathing. Daniel pressed his small hands on her chest the way he once saw people do in a movie played on a shop's TV. He pushed down again and again. "Come on, breathe," he shouted, his voice cracking. David leaned down and blew air into her mouth. Deborah knelt beside her, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Please wake up. Please." For a moment, nothing happened. Then, the girl jerked violently, coughing up a mouthful of dirty water. She gasped, air flooding back into her lungs. The triplets collapsed beside her, soaked and shaking. But they were smiling. They had saved her. What they didn't know was that this little girl wasn't just any child. She was Emily, the only daughter of the wealthiest man in Enugu, Mr. Williams. And saving her would throw them into a storm bigger than anything they had ever known. Backhand index pointing right, friends. If this story already has your heart racing, don't forget to subscribe right now. Give this video a thumbs up so more people can find it. And tell me where you're watching from and the time. I'd love to connect with you. Emily lay on the grass, coughing and sobbing as dirty water streamed from her nose and mouth. Her little fingers clawed at the ground as she gasped for air. Daniel held her hand tightly, whispering, "You're safe now, you're safe." But the peace didn't last. A crowd had gathered, drawn by the noise. Instead of clapping or thanking them, the bystanders frowned. "Who are these children?" A man with a red cap barked, pointing at the triplets. "See as them dirty." "Nah, these street rats pushed the girl inside water. ABI. Deborah's mouth fell open. "No. We saved her, she was drowning." But the crowd murmured angrily. "Look at them, always hanging around the canal. They must have tried to steal from her. See, as the girl fine. Does she look like somebody who will play with gutter children?" The harsh words stung sharper than the dirty water still burning their skin. Daniel stepped in front of his siblings, fists clenched though his body trembled. "We didn't hurt her. We saved her." Just then, A black SUV screeched to a halt nearby. The driver, a stern man in uniform, jumped out, followed by two men in suits. Their faces tightened when they saw Emily lying weakly on the ground. "Emily," one of them shouted, rushing forward. He scooped her into his arms, panic etched across his face. The murmuring crowd grew louder. Fingers pointed at the triplets again. "They're the ones." Yes, they wanted to kidnap her. Deborah shook her head violently, tears spilling. "No, that's not true. Please believe us." But the men in suits weren't listening. One grabbed David roughly by the arm. "What did you do to her?" he barked. David winced. "We didn't." Daniel shoved himself between them. "Leave my brother. We saved her, we didn't hurt her." His voice was fierce, but his small frame looked powerless against the tall, angry men. The driver studied them with cold eyes. "These are street kids. Thieves. Who knows what they planned?" Emily stirred weakly in the man's arms. She tried to speak, her voice hoarse. "They helped me." But her words were drowned out by the chaos. The shouting crowd, the angry accusations, the men pulling at the triplets. Deborah clutched Daniel's arm, terrified. For a moment, it seemed like the children who risked their lives to save Emily were about to be dragged away as criminals. And far in the distance, sirens wailed. The police were coming. The wail of sirens grew louder until two police vans pulled up beside the canal. Officers in navy uniforms poured out, their boots stomping on wet ground. The crowd parted quickly, shouting and pointing fingers toward the triplets. "Officer! Officer!" a woman cried, waving her wrapper. These three street children tried to kill that rich man's daughter. The officers' faces hardened. Without a word, two policemen grabbed Daniel and David by the shoulders. Another reached for Deborah, whose thin arms shook as she clung to her brother. "Wait. We didn't do anything," Daniel shouted, his small chest heaving. "We saved her. Ask her." But the officers didn't listen. They twisted his wrists behind his back like he was a criminal. Daniel winced in pain, his jaw trembling, but he refused to cry. David's voice cracked. "Please let us go. She was drowning. We helped her." The crowd only jeered louder. "Lies. They're always looking for trouble. Look at their faces, hungry thieves." Deborah's tears streamed freely now. "Why won't anyone believe us?" she whispered, her voice breaking like glass. The officer, holding her, sneered. "You'll explain yourselves at the station." Just then, Emily stirred in the arms of the suited man. Her eyelids fluttered open, and her lips trembled. She coughed weakly and whispered, "They saved me." The words were soft, almost swallowed by the noise. But Daniel caught them. His eyes widened. "Say it again. Please tell them." The crowd fell silent for a moment, trying to catch her words. One officer leaned closer, frowning. "What did she say?" Emily's little hand lifted shakily, pointing toward the triplets. Her voice was a fragile thread. "They pulled me out. They saved me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The police froze. Even the men in suits looked startled. The officer, gripping Daniel, loosened his hold. "Is that true?" he muttered. Emily nodded weakly, her chest rising and falling with effort. "They saved my life." For a moment, the air shifted. The cruel accusations dissolved into murmurs of confusion. The woman in the wrapper shook her head slowly. "And maybe we were wrong." Daniel straightened his back despite the ache in his arms. His voice, though hoarse, carried the pride of a boy who refused to be broken. "We told you. We saved her." But the men in suits weren't ready to yield. The taller one sneered. Even if they saved her, what were they doing here? Why were they near the girl at all? These kids can't be trusted. The triplets' brief relief curdled back into fear. Emily's weak defense wasn't enough to silence suspicion. And as the officers exchanged uncertain glances, the sound of screeching tires cut through the murmurs. A long, black limousine rolled to a stop. Its doors opened slowly, and out stepped a man whose presence silenced the entire street. Mr. Williams himself. The limousine door closed with a heavy thud. Mr. Williams stepped out, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark suit sharper than a blade. His face was carved from stone, eyes cold like polished glass, and his presence commanded silence. The crowd instinctively shifted back. No one wanted to block his path. Whispers darted through the air. "That's him. Mr. Williams. Billionaire Williams has come." He didn't glance at anyone. His gaze went straight to the stretcher where Emily lay, pale and trembling, her damp hair sticking to her forehead. For the first time, the man's stern face cracked, not with anger, but with raw fear. "Emily," his voice broke as he crouched beside her, brushing her wet cheek. "My daughter, what happened to you?" Emily's lips quivered. She pointed weakly toward the triplets, her eyes glistening. "Daddy, they saved me. Please don't let them take them away." Mr. Williams' eyes lifted slowly, turning toward Daniel, David, and Deborah. His stare cut through them like lightning. The triplets shrank under it, but Daniel, his chest still heaving, stood tall. The officers bowed slightly as they explained. "Sir, we found these children here. The girl says they saved her. But the crowd accused them," another officer added carefully. "We were about to take them in for questioning." Mr. Williams rose to his full height, towering over the triplets. He looked them over, from their torn slippers to their dust-stained shirts. His jaw tightened. "Street children," he said flatly. "Why were you near my daughter?" Daniel swallowed hard, his throat dry. "Sir, she fell into the water. We didn't think. We just jumped in." Mr. Williams' eyes narrowed. "You expect me to believe you risked your lives for a stranger?" David's small fists clenched at his side. His voice cracked but carried truth. "We couldn't let her die, no matter who she was." Deborah, tears streaking her face, added softly, "We know what it feels like to lose someone. We couldn't watch it happen again." The billionaire's expression flickered, a shadow of something unspoken. But before anyone could read it, he turned sharply to the men in suits. "Get her to the hospital. Now." "Yes, sir." They moved quickly, lifting Emily with the nurse's help. Emily's weak cry cut through the air. "Daddy, don't let them take the triplets away, please." Mr. Williams froze, his daughter's words digging deeper than he wanted to admit. His gaze fell back on the three children. This time, there was no outright accusation in his eyes, but there was no warmth either. Only cold calculation, as though weighing their worth. "Officers," he said at last, his tone like iron. "Bring them along. I'll deal with them myself." The crowd gasped. Some murmured in relief, others in fear. The triplets glanced at one another, confusion and dread swirling in their young eyes. As the limousine door swung open again, Deborah whispered, "What's going to happen to us?" Daniel clenched his jaw, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know, but we have to stay strong." And with that, the triplets were ushered into the car of the man who could either destroy their lives or change them forever. The limousine hummed softly as it cut through the busy Enugu streets. From the windows, the triplets caught flashes of a world they'd never touched. Bright shop fronts, glowing streetlights, and people strolling in clothes too fine to imagine. It all blurred past them, yet inside the car, the air was heavy, stiff, and silent. Mr. Williams sat opposite them, his broad frame leaning back against the leather seat, eyes unreadable behind his sharp glasses. His fingers drummed once against his knee before falling still. He didn't speak a word, but his silence was louder than thunder. David fidgeted, eyes darting nervously. Deborah clutched her skirt, her small shoulders trembling. Daniel sat rigid, staring down at his own rough palms, still scratched from dragging Emily out of the water. Finally, the limousine slowed and turned into a driveway longer than any street they had ever walked. At the end rose a mansion that seemed to touch the clouds, white marble walls, polished gates that gleamed under security lights, and guards at every corner. The children's mouths parted in awe. The car stopped. The door swung open. A tall guard barked, "Out." The triplets hesitated, then stepped onto a courtyard paved with shining stone. Their worn sandals scuffed against the surface, out of place in a world too clean, too perfect. They lifted their eyes to the towering mansion, its glass windows reflecting their own small, fragile figures. Inside was even grander. Chandeliers hung like floating suns, gold-trimmed staircases coiled upward, and paintings taller than the children loomed over them. Every corner breathed wealth. And yet, in the middle of such beauty, they felt smaller than ever. Mr. Williams finally broke the silence. "Stand there." They obeyed, lined up in the middle of the marble floor, staring down like prisoners awaiting judgment. He paced slowly before them, his shoes clicking with precision. "Emily tells me you saved her life," he said at last, his voice calm but sharp. "I should thank you." Relief flickered in Deborah's eyes. But then his tone hardened. "But saving my daughter doesn't erase questions. Who are you? Where are your parents? Why should I believe this wasn't some scheme?" The children's hearts sank. Daniel's lips parted, but no words came. David looked down at his feet. Deborah's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Williams stopped, his shadow falling across them. "Tell me everything, and be quick about it." Daniel's chest rose and fell. He opened his mouth, and for the first time since they had stepped foot in the mansion, his voice carried not just fear, but fire. "We don't have parents," he said. "Not anymore. Our mother died when we were small. Our father left us long before that. Since then, it's just been us." His words tumbled out like stones, sharp and raw. He spoke of nights sleeping under broken roofs, of days begging on streets, of hunger so deep it felt like fire in their bellies. Deborah added how sometimes she tied her stomach with a rag, so she wouldn't feel a twist from emptiness. David spoke of scavenging food scraps just to keep them alive. The room grew silent, the echoes of their pain bouncing off walls that had never known such struggle. Mr. Williams did not move. His eyes stayed fixed on them, his face unreadable, but inside, something stirred. Memories he had locked away, shadows he had buried. Still, his voice remained cold. "So you're orphans. That explains your boldness. But boldness can be dangerous." He leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Why should I let you stay here even one more night?" The question fell like a hammer. The triplets froze, hearts thudding. For the first time, Daniel didn't have an answer. The silence in the grand hall was suffocating. The marble floor beneath the children seemed colder, harder, as though the mansion itself had turned against them. Daniel's fists clenched at his side, but he didn't dare speak. David's lips quivered, wanting to cry, but forcing himself to stay still. Deborah's chest rose and fell with uneven breaths, her small fingers twisting together until her knuckles turned white. Mr. Williams stood tall before them, his expression cut from stone. His eyes carried no softness, only judgment. "You think a sad story will make me bend?" His voice was low, sharp, unrelenting. "This world does not reward pity. It punishes weakness. If you're lying, if this is some clever trick." "Daddy, stop." The voice broke through the tension like lightning. All heads turned. Emily stood at the top of the staircase, still wrapped in a blanket, her hair damp from the rescue, her small frame trembling. Yet her eyes, clear, sharp, and wet with tears, were fixed on her father. She ran down the stairs, her little feet pattering against the marble. When she reached the children, she stood in front of them, arms spread wide like a fragile shield. "They're not lying," she cried, her voice shaking but fierce. "They saved me. I was drowning, Daddy. You didn't see it, the water was pulling me down. I thought I was going to die." Tears welled up, spilling down her cheeks. "If it wasn't for them, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be alive." The triplets froze. None of them had expected her to speak, let alone defend them with such fire. Mr. Williams' jaw tightened. His eyes flicked from Emily's desperate face to the three shivering children behind her. For the briefest moment, something flickered across his stern features. Hesitation, maybe even doubt. But it vanished quickly. "Emily," he said, his voice softer but still firm, "you don't understand the world. Not everyone who smiles at you is your friend. Not everyone who saves you does it for kindness." Emily shook her head fiercely. "You're wrong. I saw it in their eyes. They weren't thinking about money. They weren't thinking about tricks. They just wanted to help. And now you're scaring them." Her voice cracked, and she sobbed openly, clinging to Deborah's arm. "Please, Daddy, don't send them away. Don't punish them." Deborah stiffened, shocked by the warmth of Emily's grip. Her lips parted, but no sound came. David stared at the floor, his chest tight with feelings he didn't know how to name. Daniel looked at Emily, then at Mr. Williams, his jaw tight, his young eyes burning with defiance. The room fell silent again. But this silence was different, softer, trembling. Mr. Williams exhaled slowly, the weight of his daughter's plea pressing against his carefully built walls. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, in a voice almost reluctant, he spoke. "You will stay tonight." The triplets gasped. Emily's sobs slowed into hiccups of relief. "But understand this," Mr. Williams continued, his tone hardening again. "One mistake, one lie, one act of disrespect, and you will be thrown out of this house. Do you understand?" Daniel nodded quickly. Deborah wiped her tears and whispered, "Yes, sir." David only managed a shaky, "We understand." Emily smiled weakly, hugging Deborah tighter, as if she had won them a chance at life. But in the shadows of his heart, Mr. Williams' doubt had not faded. He had given them shelter for one night, nothing more. The servants moved quietly, almost reluctantly, as they led the triplets through the mansion's long corridors. The children's bare feet padded across the polished floors, leaving faint smudges on the glossy marble. Chandeliers glittered overhead, their golden glow so unlike the dim, flickering lanterns of the streets. Deborah's wide eyes darted to every corner, drinking in the sight of paintings taller than her, furniture carved with gold, and rugs so soft they swallowed her toes. David touched the wall as he walked, just to make sure it was real. Daniel, though, kept his chin high, forcing himself not to look amazed. "Don't act impressed," he whispered to his siblings, "or they'll think we don't belong." At last, the servants opened a door to a large room. Inside were 3 separate beds, real beds, with white sheets, fluffy pillows, and warm blankets folded neatly. The triplets froze in the doorway. Beds. Not wooden planks. Not cold cement. Not the damp cardboard they sometimes shared in an alley. Real beds. Deborah stepped forward first, her tiny fingers trembling as she touched the fabric of the nearest pillow. She pressed her face into it, inhaling deeply. It smelled of lavender. For a moment, she thought she might cry again. David climbed onto the second bed, bouncing once before quickly stopping, worried someone would yell at him. "It's soft," he whispered, his voice full of awe. Daniel sat on the edge of the third bed, stiff as a soldier, his jaw clenched. "Don't get too comfortable," he said one night. Just one night. But even as he said it, his body betrayed him, sinking slightly into the cushion, his tired limbs refusing to hold the weight of all his caution. The children changed into clean clothes the servants had given them. Deborah wore a white cotton gown that swished softly around her ankles. David had a blue pajama set, and Daniel a plain gray one. They looked at one another, almost laughing at how strange they felt, like imposters in someone else's dream. That night, as the mansion fell quiet, the triplets lay in their separate beds. Deborah turned her head toward her brothers, whispering across the room, Do you think this is what Mama wanted for us? A safe place? Warm food? A soft bed?" David pulled the blanket to his chin. "It feels like heaven," he murmured. But Daniel didn't answer right away. His eyes stared at the ceiling, shadowed by the moonlight streaming through the tall windows. His mind replayed Mr. Williams' warning. "One mistake, and we're gone." Finally, he whispered back, his voice low and firm. "Don't forget where we came from. This isn't ours. Tomorrow, they'll send us back to the streets. We have to be ready." The room fell silent. Deborah's eyes grew wet again, but she pressed her face into the pillow so no one would hear her soft sobs. David's breath steadied, but they carried a quiet ache. Daniel lay awake the longest, fighting sleep, as though closing his eyes might make all this disappear. And yet, despite the fear and doubt, the mansion's comfort won. For the first time in their young lives, the triplets slept under a safe roof, wrapped in warmth that almost felt like love. What they didn't know was that beyond the heavy doors of their room, Mr. Williams stood alone in the hallway, arms folded, watching the door with a storm behind his eyes. His daughter's plea had forced his hand, but his heart was far from convinced. Morning sunlight spilled through the mansion's tall windows, painting golden stripes across the polished floors. The triplets stirred one by one, still wrapped in sheets that felt like clouds. For a few seconds, David forgot where he was, until the scent of eggs and fresh bread drifted in. He bolted upright, whispering in disbelief. Food. Real food. Deborah giggled as she sat up, her hair messy and wild. Do you think we're allowed to eat it? Before Daniel could remind them to be cautious, the door creaked open. Emily peeked in, grinning from ear to ear. She wore a bright yellow dress, and her braids bounced as she hurried in. Good morning. Come on, breakfast is ready. Her cheer was so natural, so warm, that for the first time since stepping into the mansion, the triplets forgot they were outsiders. They followed her to the dining hall. The long table looked like something from a royal palace, silver spoons, porcelain plates, glasses shining like crystal. At the center were trays of steaming rice, soft bread rolls, eggs, sausages, and bowls of papaya slices. The triplets froze. Back on the streets, a single half-rotten mango was a treasure. Now here was a feast big enough to feed their whole alley. David reached first, but Daniel grabbed his wrist. Wait. What if it's a trick? What if they get angry? Emily frowned. A trick? It's breakfast. You're supposed to eat. She piled food onto their plates herself, smiling as though she couldn't understand why anyone would hesitate over something so simple. Deborah picked up a spoon, trembling. She took one bite of the fluffy eggs, and her eyes widened. She chewed slowly, then faster, then tears filled her eyes. It's so good. David joined in, shoveling bread into his mouth. He chewed noisily, not caring about manners. Emily giggled at the sight, but Daniel ate more slowly, still suspicious, though hunger betrayed his guard. Why do you eat like you haven't had food in days? Emily asked innocently. The room went quiet. Daniel's spoon stopped halfway to his mouth. Deborah lowered her head, ashamed. Then David spoke, his voice blunt, childlike, yet raw. Because we haven't. Emily's smile faded. She blinked, staring at the three of them as though seeing them differently for the first time. Where did you come from? She asked softly. And for the first time, their story began to spill out. Daniel spoke of the night their mother fell sick, how she whispered her last words with a weak smile, urging them to stay together no matter what. David recalled the cold nights under the bridge, the hunger that made his stomach cramp until he thought he'd die. Deborah described begging at traffic lights, watching other children drive by in cars, their faces pressed to the glass, while she stood barefoot on the hot tar. Emily's small hands covered her mouth. Tears welled to her eyes, but she didn't look away. She listened, every word sinking deep into her little heart. When Deborah's voice cracked, Emily slid from her chair and hugged her tightly. I'm so sorry, she whispered. No one should live like that. Not you. For a moment, the triplets froze. They weren't used to kindness from strangers. Yet Deborah clung to her, tears spilling freely. David wiped his face with the back of his hand, trying to look tough, but his lips trembled. Daniel only sat still, blinking fast, as though struggling to keep a wall around his emotions. That morning, something shifted. They were no longer just strangers in a mansion. For the first time since their mother's death, the triplets felt the warmth of being seen, truly seen. And Emily, the billionaire's daughter, who had everything, began to understand the depth of what it meant to have nothing. The laughter at the breakfast table hadn't fully settled when the sharp click of high heels echoed from the doorway. Everyone turned. A tall woman in a fitted blue gown stepped into the dining hall, her perfume flooding the air before her words did. Her eyes, cold and calculating, landed instantly on the triplets. Madame Beezy, Mr. Williams's younger sister, known in every corner of the city not just for her beauty, but for the ice in her voice and the power she wielded in her brother's house. What? She asked, her tone dripping with disdain. Are these street rats doing at my nephew's table? Emily flinched, hugging Deborah tighter. David's spoon clattered against his plate. Daniel stood slowly, squaring his small shoulders as if he could shield his siblings. They're my friends, Emily blurted out, her voice trembling but brave. They saved my life, Auntie. They're eating with me. Beezy's laugh was short and sharp, like glass breaking. Friends? Emily, you don't befriend trash you find in the gutters. She circled the table, her heels clicking like a judge's gavel. Her gaze lingered on the triplets' clothes, worn, patched, and still carrying the faint smell of dust from the streets. Deborah shrank back in her chair. David clenched his fists, muttering, "We're not trash." But Madame Beezy leaned down until her face was inches from his. "You are. And the sooner you accept that, the better." Emily's small fists balled up. "Stop it. They're good people. They risked their lives for me. If it weren't for them, I'd be dead." Her voice cracked, tears filling her eyes. But Beezy didn't flinch. She straightened, cold as ever. "And that's the only reason you're still here. Don't be fooled, Emily. These children aren't heroes. They're opportunists. Mark my words, once they get comfortable, they'll steal from us." Her words sliced through the room like a knife. Deborah lowered her eyes, shame washing over her even though she'd done nothing wrong. Daniel's jaw tightened, his silence louder than David's angry protests. Emily's face turned red with frustration, but her aunt's authority loomed too large to fight. Then, as if to prove her point, Beezy reached across the table and snatched David's plate away. "No more feasting on my brother's table. You want food? Earn it." David lunged forward, but Daniel caught his arm. "Leave it," he whispered. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned. Emily stood between them and her aunt, her small frame trembling. "If they go, I go too." For a moment, silence gripped the room. Madame Beezy's face hardened, but her eyes flicked toward the doorway, where servants had paused to watch. A scandal, even a whisper of cruelty toward Emily, would spread like wildfire. She dropped the plate back onto the table with a loud clang. "Fine. Let them eat. But don't say I didn't warn you." With one last piercing glare, she swept out of the hall, her heels striking the marble like thunder. The triplets sat frozen, their breaths shaky. Deborah's eyes brimmed with tears, David's fists remained clenched, and Daniel's lips pressed into a thin line. Emily turned to them, her voice soft but fierce. "Don't listen to her. She doesn't know you like I do. You're not trash. You're my friends. My heroes." Her words, though small, wrapped around the triplets like armor. But deep inside, they knew Madame Beezy's venom wasn't gone. It was just beginning. The triplets tried to brush off Madame Beezy's cruel words, but the shadow she left behind seemed to linger in the mansion. Later that afternoon, while Emily took the triplets to the garden, servants whispered as they passed. Their eyes darted toward the children's clothes, their dusty shoes, and then quickly away. Deborah tugged on Daniel's sleeve, whispering, "They're looking at us like Auntie Beezy did." Daniel forced a smile, even though his chest felt heavy. "Ignore them. Emily trusts us, and that's what matters." But David wasn't as calm. He kicked at a pebble with all his strength, sending it rolling across the marble tiles. "I don't care what they say. One day, we'll prove them wrong. One day, they'll all see." Emily slipped her hand into his, her small fingers warm and certain. "You already proved it. You saved me. That's something no one can take away." Her words lit up David's face, but not far from the garden. Madame Beezy was watching. She stood on the balcony above, a glass of wine in her hand, her sharp eyes following their every move. When her brother, Mr. Williams, stepped beside her, she didn't waste a second. "Do you see what's happening?" she said, her voice cool and measured. "Emily is getting too close to those children. It isn't right." Mr. Williams frowned, but said nothing. "They're from streets," Beezy continued, her words dripping like poison. "We don't know their past. We don't know what kind of people their parents were. You think they just save her out of kindness? No. They're planting themselves here, little by little. One day, they'll ask for more than food." Mr. Williams's jaw tightened. "Emily owes them her life. That's not a debt I can ignore." Beezy smirked, swirling the wine in her glass. "Debts can be repaid without opening the gates of our home to thieves. Mark my words, brother, keep them close, and you'll regret it." Her voice was calm, but her eyes flashed with something darker. Determination. Below, the triplets laughed with Emily, chasing butterflies among the flowers. Their giggles rose like music into the air, but above them, the seeds of suspicion were already being sown.